Shall we proceed? Yes, indeed. Where were we? The second ring of power, the continuation of one, the transformation of Doña Soledad. I just really love saying it like that. Okie dokie. I didn't mean to frighten you, Doña Soledad said apologetically as I watched her from 10 feet away. She showed me the palms of her hands in a gesture of surrender, as if assuring me that what I had felt was not her hand. "What did you do to me?" I asked, trying to sound calm and detached. She seemed to be either thoroughly embarrassed or baffled. She muttered something and shook her head as though she could not say it or did not know what I was talking about. "Come on, Doña Soledad," I said, coming closer to her. "Don't play tricks on me." She seemed about to weep. I wanted to comfort her, but some part of me resisted. After a moment's pause, I told her what I had felt and seen. "That's just terrible," she said in a shrieking voice. In a very childlike gesture, she covered her face with her right forearm. I thought she was crying. I came over to her and tried to put my arm around her shoulders. I could not bring myself to do it. "Come on now, Doña Soledad," I said. "Let's forget all this and let me give you these packages before I leave." I stepped in front of her to face her. I could see her black, shining eyes and part of her face behind her arm. She was not crying. She was smiling. I jumped back. Her smile terrified me. Both of us stood motionless for a long time. She kept her face covered, but I could see her eyes watching me. As I stood there, almost paralyzed with fear, I felt utterly despondent. I had fallen into a bottomless pit. Doña Soledad was a witch. My body knew it, and yet I could not really believe it. What I wanted to believe was that Doña Soledad had gone mad and was being kept in the house instead of an asylum. I did not dare move or take my eyes away from her. We must have stayed in that position for 5 or 6 minutes. She had kept her arm raised and yet motionless. She was standing at the rear of the car, almost leaning against the left fender. The lid of the trunk was still open. I thought of making a dash for the right door. The keys were in the ignition. I relaxed a bit in order to gain the momentum to run. She seemed to notice my change of position immediately. Her arm moved down, revealing her whole face. Her teeth were clenched. Her eyes were fixed on mine. They looked hard and mean. Suddenly, she lurched toward me. She stomped with her right foot like a fencer and reached out with clawed hands to grab me by my waist as she let out the most chilling shriek. My body jumped back out of her reach. I ran for the car, but with inconceivable agility, she rolled to my feet and made me trip over her. I fell face down, and she grabbed me by the left foot. I contracted my right leg, and I would have kicked her in the face with the sole of my shoe had she not let go of me and rolled back. I jumped to my feet and tried to open the door of the car. It was locked. I threw myself over the hood to reach the other side, but somehow Doña Soledad got there before I did. I tried to roll back over the hood, but midway I felt a sharp pain in my right calf. She had grabbed me by the leg. I could not kick her with my left foot. She had pinned down both of my legs against the hood. She pulled me toward her, and I fell on top of her. We wrestled on the ground. Her strength was magnificent, and her shrieks were terrifying. I could hardly move under the gigantic pressure of her body. It was not a matter of weight, but rather tension, and she had it. Suddenly, I heard a growl, and the enormous dog jumped on her back and shoved her away from me. I stood up. I wanted to get into the car, but the woman and the dog were fighting by the door. The only retreat was to go inside the house. I made it in 1 or 2 seconds. I did not turn to look at them, but rushed inside and closed the door behind me, securing it with the iron bar that was behind it. I ran to the back and did the same with the other door. From inside, I could hear the furious growling of the dog and the woman's inhuman shrieks. Then suddenly, the dog's barking and growling turned into whining and howling as if he were in pain or as if something were frightening him. I felt a jolt in the pit of my stomach. My ears began to buzz. I realized that I was trapped inside the house. I had a fit of sheer terror. I was revolted at my stupidity in running into the house. The woman's attack had confused me so intensely that I had lost all sense of strategy and had behaved as if I were running away from an ordinary opponent who could be shut out by simply closing a door. I heard someone come to the door and lean against it, trying to force it open. Then there were loud knocks and banging on it. "Open the door," Doña Soledad said in a hard voice. "That goddamn dog has mauled me." I deliberated whether or not to let her in. What came to my mind was the memory of a confrontation I had had years before with a sorceress who had, according to Don Juan, adopted his shape in order to fool me and deliver a deadly blow. Obviously, Doña Soledad was not as I had known her, but I had reasons to doubt that she was a sorceress. The time element played a decisive role in my conviction. Pablito, Nestor, and I had been involved with Don Juan and Don Gennaro for years, and we were not sorcerers at all. How could Doña Soledad be one? No matter how much she had changed, she could not improvise something that would take a lifetime to accomplish. "Why did you attack me?" I asked, speaking loudly so as to be heard through the thick door. She answered that the Nahual had told her not to let me go. I asked her why. She did not answer. Instead, she banged on the door furiously, and I banged back even harder. We went on hitting the door for a few minutes. She stopped and started begging me to open it. I had a surge of nervous energy. I knew that if I opened the door, I might have a chance to flee. I moved the iron bar from the door. She staggered in. Her blouse was torn. The band that held her hair had fallen off, and her long hair was all over her face. "Look what that son of a bitch dog did to me," she yelled. "Look! Look!" I took a deep breath. She seemed to be somewhat dazed. She sat down on a bench and began to take off her tattered blouse. I seized that moment to run out of the house and make a dash for the car. With a speed that was born only out of fear, I got inside, shut the door, automatically turned on the motor, and put the car in reverse. I stepped on the gas and turned my head to look back through the rear window. As I turned, I felt a hot breath on my face. I heard a horrendous growl and saw in a flash the demoniacal eyes of the dog. He was standing on the back seat. I saw his horrible teeth almost in my eyes. I ducked my head. His teeth grabbed my hair. I must have curled my whole body on the seat, and in doing so, I let my foot off the clutch. The jerk of the car made the beast lose his balance. I opened the door and scrambled out. The head of the dog jutted out through the door. I heard his enormous teeth click as his jaws closed tight, missing my heels by a few inches. The car began to roll back, and I made another dash for the house. I stopped before I had reached the door. Doña Soledad was standing there. She had tied her hair up again. She had thrown a shawl over her shoulders. She stared at me for a moment and then began to laugh. Very softly at first, as if her wounds hurt her, and then loudly. She pointed a finger at me and held her stomach as she convulsed with laughter. She bent over and stretched, seemingly to catch her breath. She was naked above the waist. I could see her breasts, shaking with the convulsions of laughter. I felt that all was lost. I looked back toward the car. It had come to a stop after rolling 4 or 5 feet. The door had closed again, sealing the dog inside. I could see and hear the enormous beast biting the back of the front seat and pawing the windows. A most peculiar decision faced me at that moment. I did not know who scared me the most, Doña Soledad or the dog. After a moment's thought, I decided that the dog was just a stupid beast. I ran back to the car and climbed up on the roof. The noise enraged the dog. I heard him ripping the upholstery. Lying on the roof, I managed to open the driver's door. My idea was to open both doors and then slide from the roof into the car through one of them after the dog had gone out through the other one. I leaned over to open the right door. I'd forgotten that it was locked. At that moment, the dog's head came out through the open door. I had an attack of blind panic at the idea that the dog was going to jump out of the car and onto the roof. In less than a second, I had leaped to the ground and found myself standing at the door of the house. Doña Soledad was bracing herself in the doorway. Laughter came out of her in spurts that seemed almost painful. The dog had remained inside the car, still frothing with rage. Apparently, he was too large and could not squeeze his bulky frame over the front seat. I went to the car and gently closed the door again. I began to look for a stick long enough to release the safety lock on the right-hand door. I searched in the area in front of the house. There was not a single piece of wood lying around. Doña Soledad, in the meantime, had gone inside. I assessed my situation. I had no other alternative but to ask her help. With great trepidation, I crossed the threshold, looking in every direction in case she might have been hiding behind the door, waiting for me. "Doña Soledad!" I yelled out. "What the hell do you want?" she yelled back from her room. "Would you please go out and get your dog out of my car?" I said. "Are you kidding?" she replied. "That's not my dog. I've told you already. He belongs to my girls." "Where are your girls?" I asked. "They are in the mountains," she replied. She came out of her room and faced me. "Do you want to see what that goddamn dog did to me?" she asked in a dry tone. "Look." She unwrapped her shawl and showed me her naked back. I found no visible tooth marks on her back. There were only a few long, superficial scratches she might have gotten by rubbing against the hard ground. For all that matter, she could have scratched herself when she attacked me. "You have nothing there," I said. "Come and look in the light," she said, and went over by the door. She insisted that I look carefully for the gashes of the dog's teeth. I felt stupid. I had a heavy sensation around my eyes, especially on my brow. I went outside instead. The dog had not moved and began to bark as soon as I came out the door. I cursed myself. There was no one to blame but me. I had walked into that trap like a fool. I resolved right then to walk to town. But my wallet, my papers, everything I had was in my briefcase on the floor of the car, right under the dog's feet. I had an attack of despair. It was useless to walk to town. I did not have enough money in my pockets even to buy a cup of coffee. Besides, I did not know a soul in town. I had no other alternative but to get the dog out of the car. "What kind of food does the dog eat?" I yelled from the door. "Why don't you try your leg?" Doña Soledad yelled back from her room and cackled. I looked for some cooked food in the house. The pots were empty. There was nothing else for me to do but to confront her again. My despair had turned into rage. I stormed into her room, ready for a fight to the death. She was lying on her bed, covered with her shawl. "Please forgive me for having done all those things to you," she said bluntly, looking at the ceiling. Her boldness stopped my rage. "You must understand my position," she went on. "I couldn't let you go." She laughed softly, and in a clear, calm, and very pleasing voice, said that she was guilty of being greedy and clumsy, that she had nearly succeeded in scaring me away with her antics, but that the situation had suddenly changed. She paused and sat up in her bed, covering her breast with her shawl, then added that a strange confidence had descended into her body. She looked up at the ceiling and moved her arms in a weird rhythmic flow, like a windmill. "There is no way for you to leave now," she said. She scrutinized me without laughing. My internal rage had subsided, but my despair was more acute than ever. I honestly knew that in matters of sheer strength, I was no match for her or the dog. She said that our appointment had been set up years in advance, and that neither of us had enough power to hurry it or break it. "Don't knock yourself out trying to leave," she said. "That's as useless as my trying to keep you here. Something besides your will release you from here, and something besides my will keep you here." Somehow, her confidence had not only mellowed her, but had given her a great command over words. Her statements were compelling and crystal clear. Don Juan had always said that I was a trusting soul when it came to words. As she talked, I found myself thinking that she was not really as threatening as I thought. She no longer projected the feeling of having a chip on her shoulder. My reason was almost at ease, but another part of me was not. All the muscles of my body were like tense wires, and yet I had to admit to myself that although she scared me out of my wits, I found her most appealing. She watched me. "I'll show you how useless it is to try to leave," she said, jumping out of bed. "I'm going to help you. What do you need?" She observed me with a gleam in her eyes. Her small white teeth gave her smile a devilish touch. Her chubby face was strangely smooth and fairly free of wrinkles. 2 deep lines running from the sides of her nose to the corners of her mouth gave her face the appearance of maturity, but not age. In standing up from the bed, she casually let her shawl fall straight down, uncovering her full breasts. She did not bother to cover herself. Instead, she swelled up her chest and lifted her breasts. "Oh, you've noticed, eh?" she said, and rocked her body from side to side as if pleased with herself. "I always keep my hair tied behind my head. The Nahua told me to do so. The pull makes my face younger." I had been sure that she was going to talk about her breasts. Her shift was a surprise to me. "I don't mean that the pull on my hair is going to make me look younger," she went on with a charming smile. "The pull on my hair makes me younger." "How is that possible?" I asked. She answered me with a question. She wanted to know if I had correctly understood Don Juan when he said that anything was possible if one wants it with unbending intent. I was after a more precise explanation. I wanted to know what else she did besides tying her hair in order to look so young. She said that she lay in her bed and emptied herself of any thoughts and feelings, and then let the lines of the floor pull her wrinkles away. I pressed her for more details, any feelings, sensations, perceptions that she had experienced while lying on her bed. She insisted that she felt nothing, that she did not know how the lines in her floor worked, and that she only knew not to let her thoughts interfere. She placed her hands on my chest and shoved me very gently. It seemed to be a gesture to show that she had had enough of my questions. We walked outside, through the back door. I told her that I needed a long stick. She went directly to a pile of firewood, but there were no long sticks. I asked her if she could get me a couple of nails in order to join together 2 pieces of firewood. We looked unsuccessfully all over the house for nails. As a final resort, I had to dislodge the longest stick I could find in the chicken coop that Pablito had built in the back. The stick, although it was a bit flimsy, seemed suited for my purpose. Doña Soledad had not smiled or joked during our search. She seemed to be utterly absorbed in her task of helping me. Her concentration was so intense that I had the feeling she was wishing me to succeed. I walked to my car, armed with the long stick and a shorter one from the pile of firewood. Doña Soledad stood by the front door. I began to tease the dog with the short stick in my right hand, and at the same time I tried to release the safety lock with the long one in my other hand. The dog nearly bit my right hand and made me drop the short stick. The rage and power of the enormous beast were so immense that I nearly lost the long stick too. The dog was about to bite it in two when Doña Soledad came to my aid. Pounding on the back window, she drew the dog's attention and he let go of it. Encouraged by her distracting maneuver, I dove headfirst and slid across the length of the front seat and managed to release the safety lock. I tried to pull back immediately, but the dog charged toward me with all his might and actually thrust his massive shoulders and front paws over the front seat before I had time to back out. I felt his paws on my shoulder. I cringed. I knew that he was going to maul me. The dog lowered his head to go in for the kill, but instead of biting me, he hit the steering wheel. I scurried out and in one move climbed over the hood and onto the roof. I had goosebumps all over my body. I opened the right-hand door. I asked Doña Soledad to hand me the long stick, and with it, I pushed the lever to release the backrest from its straight position. I conceived that if I teased the dog, he would ram it forward, allowing himself room to get out of the car. But he did not move. He bit furiously on the stick instead. At that moment, Doña Soledad jumped onto the roof and lay next to me. She wanted to help me tease the dog. I told her that she could not stay on the roof because when the dog came out, I was going to get in the car and drive away. I thanked her for her help and said that she should go back in the house. She shrugged her shoulders, jumped down, and went back to the door. I pushed down the release again, and with my cap, I teased the dog. I snapped it around his eyes in front of his muzzle. The dog's fury was beyond anything I had seen, but he would not leave the seat. Finally, his massive jaws jerked the stick out of my grip. I climbed down to retrieve it from underneath the car. Suddenly, I heard Doña Soledad screaming, "Watch out, he's getting out!" I glanced up at the car. The dog was squeezing himself over the seat. He had gotten his hind paws caught in the steering wheel. Except for that, he was almost out. I dashed to the house and got inside just in time to avoid being run down by that animal. His momentum was so powerful that he rammed against the door. As she secured the door with its iron bar, Doña Soledad said in a cackling voice, "I told you it was useless." She cleared her throat and turned to look at me. "Can you tie the dog with a rope?" I asked. I was sure that she would give me a meaningless answer, but to my amazement, she said that we should try everything, even luring the dog into the house and trapping him there. Her idea appealed to me. I carefully opened the front door. The dog was no longer there. I ventured out a bit more. There was no sight of him. My hope was that the dog had gone back to his corral. I was going to wait another instant before I made a dash for my car when I heard a deep growl and saw the massive head of the beast inside my car. He had crawled back onto the front seat. Doña Soledad was right. It was useless to try. A wave of sadness enveloped me. Somehow, I knew my end was near. In a fit of sheer desperation, I told Doña Soledad that I was going to get a knife from the kitchen and kill the dog, or be killed by him. And I would have done that had it not been that there was not a single metal object in the entire house. "Didn't the Nahual teach you to accept your fate?" Doña Soledad asked as she trailed behind me. "That one out there is no ordinary dog. That dog has power. He is a warrior. He will do what he has to do, even kill you." I had a moment of uncontrollable frustration and grabbed her by the shoulders and growled. She did not seem surprised or affected by my sudden outburst. She turned her back to me and dropped her shawl to the floor. Her back was very strong and beautiful. I had an irrepressible urge to hit her, but I ran my hand across her shoulders instead. Her skin was soft and smooth. Her arms and shoulders were muscular without being big. She seemed to have a minimal layer of fat that rounded off her muscles and gave her upper body the appearance of smoothness. And yet when I pushed on any part of it with the tips of my fingers, I could feel the hardness of unseen muscles below the smooth surface. I did not want to look at her breasts. She walked to a roofed open area in back of the house that served as a kitchen. I followed her. She sat down on a bench and calmly washed her feet in a pail. While she was putting on her sandals, I went with great trepidation into a new outhouse that had been built in the back. She was standing by the door when I came out. "You like to talk," she said casually, leading me into her room. "There is no hurry. Now we can talk forever." She picked up my writing pad from the top of her chest of drawers, where she must have placed it herself, and handed it to me with exaggerated care. Then she pulled up her bedspread and folded it neatly and put it on top of the same chest of drawers. I noticed then that the two chests were the color of the walls, yellowish white, and the bed without the spread was pinkish red, more or less the color of the floor. The bedspread, on the other hand, was dark brown, like the wood of the ceiling and the wood panels of the windows. "Let's talk," she said, sitting comfortably on the bed after taking off her sandals. She placed her knees against her naked breasts. She looked like a young girl. Her aggressive and commandeering manner had subdued and changed into charm. At that moment, she was the antithesis of what she had been earlier. I had to laugh at the way she was urging me to write. She reminded me of Don Juan. "Now we have time," she said. "The wind has changed. Didn't you notice it?" I had. She said that the new direction of the wind was her own beneficial direction, and thus the wind had turned into her helper. What do you know about the wind, Doña Soledad? I asked as I calmly sat down on the foot of her bed. Only what the Nahual had taught me, she said. Each one of us, women that is, has a peculiar direction, a particular wind. Men don't. I am the north wind. When it blows, I am different. The Nahual said that a warrior can use her particular wind for whatever she wants. I used it to trim my body and remake it. Look at me! I am the north wind. Feel me when I come through the window. There was a strong wind blowing through the window, which was strategically placed to face the north. Why do you think men don't have a wind? I asked. She thought for a moment and then replied that the Nahual had never mentioned why. You wanted to know who made this floor, she said, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders. I made it myself. It took me 4 years to put it down. Now, this floor is like myself. As she spoke, I noticed that the converging lines on the floor were oriented to originate from the north. The room, however, was not perfectly aligned with the cardinal points. Thus, her bed was at odd angles with the walls, and so were the lines in the clay slabs. Why did you make the floor red, Doña Soledad? That's my color. I am red, like red dirt. I got the red clay in the mountains around here. The Nahual told me where to look, and he also helped me carry it. And so did everyone else. They all helped me. How did you fire the clay? The Nahual made me dig a pit. We filled it with firewood and then stacked up the clay slabs with flat pieces of rock in between them. I closed the pit with a lid of dirt and wire and set the wood on fire. It burned for days. How did you keep the slabs from warping? I didn't.